Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 20 of our reading of George Orwell's 1984. And as always, we're going to go over the DM copyright information. Here we go. Copyright 1961. This is the 1961 version because of the afterword, which we will read after we read the book. We'll also read about the principles of doublethink and the information here about George Orwell himself. Anyways, in the last one, basically the last video was all reading Goldstein's book. And so we're going to continue from there. We cut the other one short because we have this huge paragraph here that goes on, and I didn't think there would be time that I could read it in like the 4 minutes I have left. So we are going to start with that. All members of the inner party believe in this coming conquest as an article of faith that is to be achieved either by gradually acquiring more and more territory and so building up an overwhelming preponderance of power, or by the discovery of some new and unanswerable weapon. The search for new weapons continues increasingly, and in one of the very few remaining activities in which the inventive or speculative type of mind can find any outlet. In Oceania, at the present day, science in the old sense has almost ceased to exist. In Newspeak, there is no word for science. The empirical method of thought on which all the scientific advancements of the past were founded is opposed to the most fundamental principles of Ingsoc, and even technological process only happens when its products can be in some way used for the diminution of human liberty. In all the useful arts, the world is either standing still or going backwards. The fields are cultivated with horse plows while books are written by machinery. But in matters of vital importance, meaning in effect war and police espionage, the empirical approach is still encouraged, or at least tolerated. The two aims of the party are to conquer the whole surface of the earth and to extinguish once and for all the possibility of independent thought. There are therefore two great problems which the party is concerned to solve. One is how to discover against his will what another human being is thinking, and the other is how to kill several 100 million people in a few seconds without giving warning beforehand. In so far as scientific research still continues, this is its subject matter. The science of today is either a mixture of psychology and inquisitor, studying with extraordinary minuteness the meaning of facial expression, gestures, and tones of voice, and testing the truth-producing effects of drugs, shock therapy, hypnosis, and physical torture. Or he's a chemist, physicist, or biologist, concerned only with such branches of his special subject as are relevant to the task, the taking of life. In the vast laboratories of the Ministry of Peace and in the experimental stations hidden in the Brazilian forest or in the Australian desert or in the lost islands of the Antarctic, the teams of experts are indefatigably at work. Some are concerned simply with planning the logistics of future wars. Others devise larger and larger rocket bombs, more and more powerful explosives, and more impenetrable armor plating. Others search for new and deadlier gases, or for soluble poisons capable of being produced in such quantities as to destroy the vegetation of whole continents, or for breeds of disease, germs immunized against all possible antibodies. Others strive to produce a vehicle that shall bore its way under the soil like a submarine under the water, or an airplane as independent of its base as a sailing ship. Others explore even remoter possibilities, such as focusing the sun's rays through lenses suspended thousands of kilometers away in space, or producing artificial earthquakes and tidal waves by tapping the heat at the Earth's center. But none of these projects ever come anywhere near realization, and none of the three superstates ever gains a significant lead on the others. What is more remarkable is that all three powers already possess in the atomic bomb a weapon far more powerful than any that their present research are likely to discover. Present researches. Although the party, according to its habit, claims the invention for itself, atomic bombs first appeared in the early 1940s and were first used on a large scale about 10 years later. At that time, some hundreds of bombs were dropped on industrial centers, chiefly in European Russia, Western Europe, and North America. The effect was to convince the ruling groups of all countries that a few more atomic bombs would mean the end of organized society and hence of their own power. Therefore, although no formal agreement was ever made or hinted at, no more bombs were dropped. All three powers merely continued to produce atomic bombs and store them up against the decisive opportunity, which they all believe will come sooner or later. And meanwhile, the art of war has remained almost stationary for 30 or 40 years. Helicopters are more used than they were formerly. Bombing planes have been largely superseded by self-propelled projectiles, and the fragile, movable battleship has given way to the almost unsinkable floating fortress. But otherwise, there has been little development. The tank, the submarine, the torpedo, the machine gun, even the rifle and the hand grenade are still in use. And in spite of the endless slaughter, reports in the press and on the telescreens, the desperate battle of earlier wars in which thousands or even millions of people were often killed in a few weeks has never been repeated. None of the three superstates ever attempts any maneuvers which involves the risk of serious defeat. When any large operation is undertaken, it is usually to surprise attack against an ally. The strategy that all three powers are following, or pretend to themselves that they are following, is the same. The plan is, by the combination of fighting, bargaining, and well-timed strokes of treachery, to acquire a ring of bases completely encircling one or another of the rival states, and then to sign a pact of friendship with the rival and remain on peaceful terms for so many years as to lull suspicion to sleep. During this time, rockets loaded with atomic bombs can be assembled at all the strategic spots. Finally, they will all be fired simultaneously with effort so devastating as to make retaliation impossible. It will then be time to sign a pact of friendship with the remaining world power in preparation for another attack. This scheme, it is hardly necessary to say, is more daydream. It is a mere daydream, impossible of realization. Moreover, no fighting ever occurs except on the disputed areas around the equator and the poles. And the pole. No invasion of enemy territory is ever undertaken. This explains the fact that some places the frontiers between the superstates are arbitrary. Eurasia, for example, could easily conquer the British Isles, which are geographically part of Europe. Or on the other hand, it would be possible for Oceania to push its frontiers to the Rhine or even to the Vistula. But this would violate the principles. That would violate the principle. Following on all sides, followed on all sides, though never formulated, of cultural integrity. If Oceania were to conquer the areas that used once to be known as France and Germany, it would be necessary either to exterminate the inhabitants, a task of great physical difficulty, or to assimilate a population of about 100 million people, who, so far as technological development goes, are roughly on the oceanic level. The problem is the same for all three superstates. It is absolutely necessary to their. Make sure that I didn't miss anything. It is absolutely necessary to their structure that there should be no contact with foreigners except to a limited extent. With war prisoners and colored slaves, even the official ally of the moment is always regarded with the darkest suspicion. War prisoners, apart from average citizen, war prisoners apart, the average citizen of Oceania never set eyes on a citizen of either Eurasia or East Asia, and he is forbidden the knowledge of foreign languages. If he were allowed contact with foreigners, he would discover that they are creatures similar to himself, and that most of what he has been told about them is lies. The sealed world in which he lives would be broken, and the fear, hatred, and self-righteousness on which his morale depends might evaporate. It is therefore realized on all sides that however often Persia or Egypt or Java or Ceylon may change hands, the main frontiers must never be crossed by anyone except bombs. Or by anything except bombs. Under this lies the fact never mentioned aloud, but tacitly understood and acted upon, namely that the condition of life in all three superstates are very much the same. In Oceania, the prevailing philosophy is called Ingsoc. In Eurasia, it's called Neo-Bolshevism. And in East Asia, it is called by the Chinese name, usually translated as death worship, but perhaps better rendered as obliteration of self. The citizen of Oceania is not allowed to know anything of the tenets of the other two philosophies, but he is taught to execrate them as barbarous outrages upon morality and common sense. Actually, the three philosophies are barely distinguishable, and the social systems which they support are not distinguishable at all. Everywhere there is the same pyramidal structure, the same worship of the semi-divine leader, the same economy existing by and for continuous warfare. It follows that the three superstates not only cannot conquer one another, but would gain no advantage by doing so. On the contrary, so long as they remain in conflict, they prop one another up, like three sheaves of corn. And as usual, the ruling groups of all three powers are simultaneously aware and unaware of what they are doing. Their lives are dedicated to world conquest, but they also know that it is necessary that the war should continue everlastingly and without victory. Meanwhile, the fact that there is no danger of conquest makes possible the denial of reality, which is the special feature of Ingsoc and its rival system of thought. Here, it is necessary to repeat what has been said earlier, that by becoming continuous war has fundamentally changed in character. In the past ages, a war, almost by definition, was something that sooner or later comes to an end, usually in unmistakable victory or defeat. In the past also, war was one of the main instruments by which human societies were kept in touch with physical reality. All rulers of all ages have tried to impose a false view of the world upon their followers, but they could not afford to encourage any illusion that tended to impair military efficiency. so long as defeat meant the loss of independence or some other result generally held to be undesirable. The precaution against defeat had to be had to be serious. Physical facts could not be ignored. In philosophy or religion or ethics or politics, 2 and 2 might make 5, but when one was designing a gun or an airplane, they had to make 4. Inefficient nations were always conquered sooner or later, and the struggle for efficiency was inimical to illusions. Moreover, in the efficient okay, moreover, to be efficient, what it was necessary to be able to learn from the past, which meant having a fairly accurate idea of what had happened in the past. Newspapers and history books were, of course, always colored and biased, but falsification of the kind that is practiced today would have been impossible. War was a sure safeguard of sanity, and so far as the ruling class was concerned, it was probably the most important of all safeguards. While war could be won or lost, no ruling class could be completely irresponsible. But when war becomes literally continuous, it also ceases to be dangerous. The war is continuous. There is no such thing as military necessity. Technical progress can cease, and the most palpable facts can be denied or disregarded. As we have seen, researches that can be called scientific are still carried out for the purposes of war, but they are essentially a kind of daydreaming, and their failure to show results is not important. Efficiency, even military efficiency, is no longer needed. Nothing is efficient in Oceania except the thought police, since each of the 3 superstates is unconquerable. Each is in effect a separate universe within which almost any perversion of thought can be safely practiced. Reality only exists. Reality only exerts its pressure through the needs of everyday life, the need to eat and drink, to get shelter and clothing, to avoid swallowing poison or stepping out a top-story window, and the like. Between life and death and between physical pleasure and physical pain, there is still a distinction, but that is all. Cut off from contact with the outer world and with the past, the citizens of Oceania is like a man. The citizen of Oceania is like a man in interstellar space who has no way of knowing which direction is up and which is down. The rulers of such a state are absolute, as the pharaohs or the Caesars could not be. They are obliged to prevent their followers from starving to death in numbers large enough to be inconvenient, and technically, as and they are obliged to remain in the same low level of military technique as their rivals, but once the minimum is achieved, they can twist reality into whatever shape they choose. The war, therefore, if we judge it by the standard of previous wars, is merely an imposture. Imposture, as in, not imposter, as in, not, okay. There's an imposture. It is like the battles between certain ruminant animals whose horns are set at such an angle that they are incapable of hurting one another. But though it is unreal, it is not meaningless. It eats up the surplus of consumed goods, and it helps to preserve the special mental atmosphere that a hierarchical society, hierarchical, that's a word that's hard to say. that a hierarchical society needs. War it will see war it will be seen is now a purely internal affair. In the past, ruling groups of all countries, limited, although they might recognize their common interest. In the past, the ruling groups of all countries, although they might recognize their common interest and therefore limit the destructiveness of war, did fight against one another, and the victor always plundered the vanquished. In our own day, they are not fighting against one another at all. The war is waged by each ruling group against its own subjects, and the object of war is not to make or prevent conquest of territory, but to keep the structure of society intact. The very word war, therefore, has become misleading. It would probably be accurate to say that by becoming continuous, war has ceased to exist. The peculiar pressure that is exerted on human beings between the Neolithic age and the early 20th century has disappeared and has been replaced by something quite different. The effect would be much the same if the three superstates, instead of fighting one another, should agree to live in perpetual peace, each inviolate within its own boundaries. For in that case, each would still be a self-contained universe, freed forever from the sobering influence of external danger. A peace that was truly permanent would be the same as a permanent war. This, although the vast majority of party members understand it only in a shallower sense, is the inner meaning of the party slogan, "War is peace." Winston stopped reading for a moment. Somewhere in the remote distance, a rocket bomb thundered. The blissful feeling of being alone with the forbidden book in a room with no telescreen had not worn off. Solitude and safety were physical sensations, mixed up somehow with the tiredness of his body, the softness of the chair, the touch of the faint breeze from the window that played upon his cheek. The book fascinated him, or more exactly, it reassured him. In a sense, it told him nothing that was new, but that was part of the attraction. It said what he would have said if it had been possible for him to set his scattered thoughts in order. It was the product of a mind similar to his own, but enormously more powerful, more systematic, less fear-ridden. The best books, he perceived, are those that tell you what you know already. He had just turned back to chapter 1 when he heard Julia's footsteps on the stairs and started out of his chair to meet her. She dumped her brown tool bag on the floor and flung herself in his arms. It was more than a week since they had seen each other. "I've got the book," he said as they disentangled themselves. "Oh, you've got it? Good," she said without much interest, and almost immediately knelt down beside the oil stove to make the coffee. They did not return to the subject until they had been in bed for half an hour. The evening was just cool enough to make it worthwhile to pull up the counterpane, for from below came the familiar sound of singing and the scrape of boots on the flagstone. The brawny, red-armed woman, whom Winston had seen there on the first visit, was almost a fixture in the yard. There seemed to be no hour of the day when she was not marching to and fro between the washtub and the line, alternately gagging herself with clothes pegs and breaking forth into lusty song. Juliet settled down on her side and seemed to be already on the point of falling asleep. He reached out for the book, which was lying on the floor, and sat up against the bedhead. "We must read it," he said. You too are a member of the Brotherhood. All members of the Brotherhood have to read it." "You read it," she said, with her eyes shut. "Read it aloud. That's the best way. Then you can explain it to me as you go." The clock hand said 6, meaning 18. They had 3 or 4 hours ahead of them. He propped the book against his knees and began reading. Chapter 1, Ignorance is Strength. Throughout recorded time, and probably since the end of the Neolithic age, there had been three kinds of people in the world: the high, the middle, and the low. They have been subdivided in many ways. They have borne countless different names, and their relative numbers, as well as their attitude towards one another, have varied from age to age, but the essential structure of society has never altered, even after enormous upheavals and seemingly irrevocable changes. The same pattern has always reasserted itself, just as a gyroscope will always return to equilibrium, however far it is pushed one way or the other. Julia, are you awake? Said Winston. Yes, my love, I'm listening. Go on. It's marvelous. He continued reading. The aims of the three groups are entirely irreconcilable. The aim of the high is to remain where they are. The aim of the middle is to change places with the high, and the aim of the low, when they have an aim, for it is an abiding characteristic of the low that they are too much crushed by drudgery to be more than intermittently conscious about anything outside their daily lives. It is to abolish all distinctions and create a society in which all men should be equal. Thus, throughout history, a struggle which is the same in the main outlines recurs over and over again. For long periods, the high seem to be securely in power, but sooner or later, there always comes a moment when they lose either their belief in themselves or their capacity to govern efficiently, or both. They are then overthrown by the middle, who enlist the low on their side by pretending to them that they are fighting for liberty and justice. As soon as they have reached their objective, the middle thrust the low back into their old position of servitude, and themselves become the high. Presently, a new middle group splits off from one of the other groups, or from both of them, and the struggle begins over again. Or the three groups, only the low, are never ever temporarily successful to achieve their aims. It will be an exaggeration to say that throughout history there have been no progress of a material kind. Even today, in a period of decline, the average human being is physically better off than he was a few centuries ago, but no advance in wealth, no shortening of manners, or no return or revolution has ever brought human equality a millimeter nearer. From a point of view of the low, no historic change has ever meant much more than a change in the name of their masters. We are going to stop it right here. We made it to page 167. We are getting to the end now. Won't be long till we are at least done with this chapter, I believe. We've been reading from George Orwell's 1984. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.